Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Data Identity and Access session, moderated by Goran Lazarevski, Executive Director by the Alliance of Microfinance Organizations, with the participation of Marc Taverner, Executive Director of INATBA, International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, Athalis Dimitra Kratouni, Founder and CEO of Tenbeo Biotechnologies, Andrius and Adamonis, Project Manager of Bank of Lithuania.
Again, well, that did sound better than what I had in mind to say. Again, thank you for joining us today. Good morning. As it was mentioned earlier, my name is Goran. I come from the Alliance of Microfinance Organizations in Skopje, North Macedonia. And we have been discussing with the organizers of this conference, who I would like to thank for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss and exchange our opinions about these interesting matters that we are talking about today. We are here today, and we had yesterday evening a very nice opportunity to discuss that with my panelists, to talk about technology, to talk about money, but as I said earlier in the pitch, to talk about the impact of these processes that are irreversible and that are changing our society and life in its very core. So it is very hard to determine and to balance the different stakeholder interests in our society, and we will make an effort today to elaborate in more details on how do we approach this from the technology point of view, but also how do we take into consideration the other, sometimes invisible processes that we need to take care of. But let's focus first on technology. Without further ado, I would like to start this session, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss about your questions later on. I'm sure there will be some, as there are many interesting points that we will cover. And some of them will also, as I mentioned earlier, open interesting dilemmas and discussions that refer to our personal understanding of integrity and the way we actually organize our lives today. But to open the session, I would like to invite, as it was announced, Marc Taverner, the Executive Director of the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, to talk about a very important thing, and I think it will be a great opening of our discussion today, how digital identity impacts access to the finance ecosystem. So I learned yesterday that I'll have a lot to learn today. So Marc, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody in the room. I think it's still good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody online. My name is Marc Taverner on behalf of the International Association of Trusted Blockchain Applications. We're very happy, very, very happy to be here with you in person, seeing real people, not shouting at an LCD screen, not trying to hide the fact that I'm in my pajamas on the bottom half, but on the top half in a shirt. It's wonderful. In fact, this morning, I had to remind myself to take my pajamas off before I walked out of my room to meet people. Otherwise, it would have been quite shocking. So we are an association that has been gathered together at the suggestion of the European Commission. 2 years ago, the European Commission saw the potential for blockchain technologies to contribute to certain challenges, to seize certain opportunities, and to create a competitive advantage that Europe might wish to exploit. But it saw a fundamental challenge, and that was that there was not enough engagement between the private and public sector. There was not enough sharing of information. There was not enough transfer of knowledge in both directions. So the European Commission went out to the blockchain industry and strongly suggested that it should create a trade association, which is now INATBA. So 2 years on, we have 170 corporate members from across the industries that we represent, with one common feature, which is that they all have an interest, they all have an active involvement in exploiting blockchain technologies. They vary very wildly from consumer goods companies through to petrochemical, through to consultancy companies, and then of course into the more traditional blockchain companies that are giving birth to cryptocurrencies, decentralized finance, and microfinancing. So that broad spectrum across 36 countries gives us a very rich evidence base to take examples of what's happening, learning of what's happening in the industry, and to try and present that to public office, to policymakers, legislators, regulators, and government strategists. And we try and stay close to the governments by using our government advisory body. The government advisory body is the second pillar of INATBA after our private sector members. On this body, we currently have 26 organizations from governments in Canada, the US, of course, across Europe, but also Australia, South Africa, and various other far-reaching geographical locations, coupled with what I call supranational organizations like the UN and the World Trade Organization. This government advisory body creates its own scheme of work. It meets under the direction of the European Commission, who is currently chairing it for a period of 12 months, and they scope out the topics that they believe, as governments, as supranational organizations, are of importance to them. We then, as INATBA, help create links between the topics that they wish to work on and the evidence base that sits within our 170 or so private sector members. Now, all of this means that we have a huge amount of data, of opinion, and of input to prevent us from creating marketing brochures that might just run the risk of promoting blockchain for the sake of it. We have an academic advisory body, which is the third pillar of our organization. Here, we have recruited just under 50 leading academics from around the world, all of whom operate in the field of blockchain. And they have the duty of keeping us honest. They focus on academic rigor, they focus on data, they focus on analysis, and they help us when we produce outputs as best we can, ensure that these outputs are evidence-driven, are driven by analytics, and are presenting opinions which are not either in the commercial interest or in the political interest. So that's a little bit about who we are. How do we structure our work? We have 15 working groups and committees spread across a number of vertical sectors, but also working horizontally. They're all on screen for you now, and because the purpose of this conference is to talk about alternative finance, I'm not going to go into the aspects on screen that refer to healthcare, sustainability, climate action, though they're super interesting topics. I want to focus on just a couple to kick us off with this short introduction to INATBA. The first is our identity working group. There is a very strong body of work being built from the members in this identity work group focused on digital identity, and in particular a file traveling through the European Parliament and the European Commission at the moment on IAAS. And this piece of work seeks to create a framework both for an approach towards self-sovereign digital identity, so the identity of an individual and how the individual can protect their identity or have control over their identity in the digital world. And that's important for finance because identity is kind of an off and an on-ramp into alternative forms of finance. The second piece of work that's taking place around IAAS is to try and gain an understanding about what are the technologies that could support the creation of digital identity across 27 countries in Europe, or 29 if you bring in Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway. We have some general comments that are up on screen that are reflections that have come out of the initial work taking place within our identity work group. I'm not going to read those out to you because I hope you can all read. If you can't, I can explain them to you a little later on during the coffee break, or you can refer back to the slides, and I'll be super happy to either add a bit more information or to help translate some of these particular items into language which might be a bit more accessible. The point I would like to make about identity in relation to finance is it is an absolute barrier. So we think, because we're in the Western world and we're in massively privileged positions, that digital identity, digital finance, access to innovation, access to alternative forms of finance is just a matter of us being well connected, figuring out how we know, educating ourselves, and then pushing the go button. But if you're a displaced individual, if you just recently had your house destroyed on the island of Palma, for example, and lost everything, you can't prove your identity in a digital world. And that creates a huge barrier. If you don't have the resources to either buy the tools or access the networks that allow you to get to that on-ramp, then it's pointless talking about alternative finance because you can't touch it. And we believe as a society we have a duty to look after the entirety of the ecosystem and not just a small section that happen to be privileged. Identity leads on to privacy, where there are some very real concerns, and our privacy work group has acknowledged that once digital identity and digital money and alternate forms of finance really gain momentum, there are some very real concerns around privacy that we need to be mindful about, and importantly, really active on right now. They've produced a report, which for the benefit of time I won't go into, but that report in 2020 is being refreshed for 2021. And so there's an open invitation to anybody who would like to engage in this topic to come and work with us and see how we can bring your evidence, your opinions into a body of work that can be presented to the policymakers, the regulators, and the legislators. And a final point, just to round off my introduction, I do apologize, Goran, it was supposed to be just a few minutes of introduction, is an open invitation to get in touch with us and collaborate. As one of the other moderators pointed out, the spirit of innovation is around openness and collaboration, and we don't see enough of that across the entirety of the industry at the moment. As a not-for-profit trade association, we can be more open than many other organizations, and we just urge you to come, join us, learn, collaborate, and go on this journey together. Goran.
Thank you very much. No, that was great. We were only 2 seconds over the time, so having such a timer really helps, I have to say that. Thank you very much, Marc. We will have several questions afterwards. I think it would be good to go through the presentations and then open the discussion for all of us at the same time, because the topics we cover today are very interconnected and actually present one whole picture. So I'm pretty sure that most of the questions will relate to all of our speakers later on. So for that purpose, I would like to invite Athalis Dimitra Kratouni. She's founder and CEO of Tenbeo Biotechnologies, and I was very interested to hear more about what they are doing, because biotechnologies is always an interesting area for us people who are not really very much familiar with the subject. And so she'll talk about the national digital identity as a service. Let's see what they have, what they will surprise us with today.
Thank you, Goran. Hello, everyone. My name is Athalis Kratouni, and I am the founder of Tenbeo. Tenbeo is a Belgian deep tech company, and we're developing the universal authentication protocol based on the unique hard signature of each individual. I will dive deep and take you through the technologies we use, in which, of course, biotechnology, nanotechnologies as well, and blockchain, in order to create the unique hard signature protocol that we have on the market. But first, let's start with the identification challenge and what motivated us as a team to develop Tenbeo's Universal Authentication Protocol. It all started with my own existential experience, as I am a mixed person, and I found myself with various identification cards. First, let me show you my Burundian ID. It is what we call Identity 1.0, and as you can see, it's a piece of blue paper that has my picture attached, and if I literally remove it and place, for example, your picture on it, you would be Athalis in Burundi. We also have the Greek version, which is the plastified version, and what we call Identity 2.0, and as I said, is the plastified version of the former one. I then have in my hands the Belgian identity card, which has a chip over here, and I will take you, for example, your use case. For example, as I used to be a tennis player and went through some wrist surgeries, with this card in Belgium, they could have access to all my medical records, of course with my consent, and they could make proper medical diagnosis over 2 to 3 years collected MRIs and scans to understand the evolution of my wrist injury. So we have those 3 identities, and what I would like to highlight as well from my own life experience, as I said, I used to be a tennis player when I was younger, is that the identity card that I holded defined who I was. For example, once again, sharing a personal experience, I tried to open a bank account when I left Burundi for Spain. I was 16 years old. I was representing Burundi and I was admitted at a big international academy. And I would say as a young person and slightly stubborn at the time, it was really dear to me to be registered as a Burundian. So I went to the bank and tried to open an account with this card, and you can imagine what happened. Actually, nothing happened. 5 minutes later, after trying to discuss and trying to understand why they wouldn't open a bank account for Burundian, I finally presented my Greek identity, and over the next 30 minutes, the account was created. So this shows, and maybe let's reflect here, in the span of 30 minutes, nothing changed in regards to who I was. Nothing changed, or nothing could have, I would say, backed the thought that my character would change as a Burundian or as a Greek, or that my credit score would change just because I would be of citizenship A or citizenship B. So all those experiences are what motivated our team to develop a universal authentication protocol based on biological features that we all have as humans. So, what is the concept? The concept of our innovation is that your heartbeat defines who you are. As I just showed you, each one of us receives an identity card issued by a third-party institution in the form of a card, corporate access badge, or loyalty cards. But why do we need third-party institutions to guarantee our own identity? By providing a distributed ledger technology platform that implements the most intrinsic feature of human life, we wanted to use the heart signature so that the heartbeat of each person would act as their private key. Our vision is of one inclusive world where each person holds a digital vault that contains a lifetime record of certificates and where authentication only requires a heartbeat. What is the technology behind the Universal Authentication Protocol? Our algorithm calculates the distance between thousands of points in 2 electrocardiogram cycles. Each one of us have different distances between the various segments, and this is how we are able to extract the unique heart signature of each individual. Now the question is which device can accurately sense the electrocardiogram cycle. We have developed what I'm going to show you here, which is Tenbeo eSkin. It is an electronic skin which will be able as well in a second phase to store each person documents and certificates. I would say in generic, each person data and all the data that each person generates from birth in one's own skin. That's why this is an electronic skin. So we have here conductive ink. It will be placed over the radial artery over here. And by placing here, the sensor will sense, of course, the ECG cycles and provide access to various services. That being said, the Universal Authentication Protocol is also compatible with existing ECG wearables to give each person the choice to choose which device suits one best, such as the Apple Watch, Garmin, and Fitbit. Well, the purpose that fueled our team is to provide authentication services by putting the human at the center of technology, as identification is the foundation of financial inclusion. As Marc said, as financial services have exponentially evolved, we need to speed up universal authentication in order to make sure that everyone is included. And that's what we're doing at Tenbeo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, this is really an eye-opening issue, and at some point I felt like we are at a medical conference and not finance, but this only shows to prove how interconnected things are, and this only proves that finance has stopped being a subject that central banks are not very often likely to talk about, and that's blockchain-based sandboxes and data and access. So this is I'm sure this will be a very refreshing experience, as Andrius actually believes what he is talking about. He is a very strongly enthusiastic believer in this, and it's always a pleasure to hear what they are doing today, and very inspiring for other central banks as well. Please, Andrius.
Thank you for introduction. So my name is Andrius Adamonis. I'm working at the Central Bank of Lithuania, and I'm project manager at Digitalization and Advanced Analytics Division. So basically, we are doing digital transformation at our bank, Central Bank. In the beginning of today's conference, Deputy Minister said that alternative finance is about technology, and then the finance already very closely related with fintech. So we at the Bank of Lithuania at 2018, we said that we need to focus on that word tech, and then to grow competence. And not to focus only on finance part, and said we are technology agnostic and we do not care if you use blockchain, I don't know, centralized database or whatever else you want to use. But we understood that we need to also follow the technology part, grow competence, and then also accelerate the development of this technology, because we saw the potential that blockchain can transform our finance and our ecosystem. So in the face of this, in the 2018, when the blockchain was in the hype, in the peak of its hype, so we created Blockchain Sandbox, because we know regulatory part, we know business part, but when the companies come and say we will use blockchain and it's distributed and everyone sees every data and it's encrypted, And we were sitting and how everyone can seize the data. And the first thing what we thought, we need to protect our customers, because if we do not understand what is going behind, so customers also will not understand what is happening in the back end, and then probably we will get a lot of inquiries about lose money and so on. So we created the regulatory and blockchain sandbox. So this is aimed for startups, for fintechs that are creating blockchain-based solutions, and they do not understand regulatory part, how the blockchain-based solution fits into existing regulatory systems. It might be a licensed activity or no, and so on. About also how they fit to all the GDPR requirements, data protection, and another regulation, not only financial market. So we are, as a central bank, we are providing consultations for the startups in the regulatory and legal questions, and we have technology partners, so IBM and Tieto Scandinavian company. They are providing their expertise on blockchain for the companies. So sandbox participants, they are developing their products. They are testing the products, and everything everything happens in controlled environment, where we can see all the transactions, where we can see source code, and we as a Bank of Lithuania, we grew our competence in blockchain, as well as we can now say when we see all the details, if we can regulate and allow this use case, this product to go live to Lithuanian European market, or we need to be careful and maybe go a little bit aside with this project. So our blockchain sandbox based on two blockchain platforms, Hyperledger Fabric and R3 Corda, and goals that probably already mentioned. So the first goal is to accelerate the development and application of blockchain-based solution in the financial market. So not only to ban and say no, blockchain cryptocurrency is bad and you cannot use this. No, we are not watchdog anymore. We are proactive regulator, and then we are fostering innovations in Lithuania. So we are accelerating the development of innovative product. And another thing that I already mentioned, so we are improving our competence. By this, we are improving quality of regulation in financial sector, because we see much more different cases, and we can adapt the regulation according to the new emerging trends, not only what was in the past. We implemented this project with the funding from European structural funds, and we implemented the also innovative way of public institution to procure services. So we used pre-commercial procurement. So we got 3 phases. We got a few companies competing between each other, and after each phase, one company fell out. So we got IBM, Deloitte, Tieto, and Intech, so some global companies and some local players. And in the last phase left only IBM and Tieto, and then now we are moving from proof of concept to production. And proof of concept was tested with 11 startups. We tested in 2 phases. So second phase of testing was with Lithuanian and Scandinavian, one Scandinavian company. So we have various different products, portfolio management, KYC solution for compliance management. So I will be able to speak about this case more in our discussion. We had factoring, payments, crowdfunding platforms, and our sandbox were capable to support all of these cases. And in the third phase, when we were testing our sandbox MVP, we were working with various different also companies from around Europe. There was no Lithuanian companies in that phase. So we also tested green digital bank and green bond issuance. We tested not only fintech and regtech solutions with a bearing point how to do regulatory reporting on DLT. and we got also private digital bank, and then one very interesting case with credit default swaps. These things caused the financial crisis in 2009, so we need to take care of this in 2020 as well. And a few words about what is LB chain. So it's based like in my name of my presentation called platform service. So we have service implemented in web application. So we have these services like regulatory self-check, where fintech can come and go through questionnaire and get initial information if some regulation in European Union applies to this project, to their project. We have blockchain wizard, so when fintech describing their product, what it should be, how it should be working, also in the form of questionnaire. We can provide an initial blockchain architecture. For example, you need to have 2 nodes and then 4 organizations and then so on. We have prototyping tool, because we saw that some fintechs, they have huge business knowledge, but they have smaller blockchain knowledge. So we implemented that tool that you can, like RPA, you can draw the processes of your product, and it creates very simple prototype based on R3 Corda. This is implemented only on Corda. And with that prototype, you can already go to investors and say, look, transactions happening, processes are working, so maybe you can invest in my product. And yeah, we have a communication channel, so active communication based on Slack, not formal emails, but chat-based with regulators and then the technology providers. And we have platforms, so we have platform parts. So we have 2 blockchain platforms. Blockchain as a service, completely isolated from outside world. So Hyperledger Fabric and R3 Corda. And that was my last slide. So thank you for your attention, and I think we will be able to cover questions during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Andrius. I had an opportunity with my colleagues from the Alliance of Microfinance Organizations to visit a few years ago the Bank of Lithuania and talk about the regulatory sandbox. And I have to say, what impressed me most was the approach that the central bank was taking towards the entrepreneurship subjects, saying, you know, previously the key message that central banks were sending out was, it is our job to make sure you don't mess up. You know, we are a watchdog institution. We are here to protect the market and the state. And instead, what I was very impressed by was that their message was that the central banks have a key role in supporting the development of the financial market and attracting new and innovative financial institutions and financial mechanisms and instruments. So the central banks need to take over that role. They are the most skilled, but also for that purpose, they need to invest a lot in people, in knowledge, to build the necessary base to compete with expertise with the entrepreneurship sector, with the businesses, because otherwise, they'll just stick to the old role of taking care people don't jeopardize the stability of the financial market. So it is very interesting that all these changes, all these new approaches require a lot of legislative changes. Of course, you need to change your legislation to adjust to these requests that are sometimes very revolutionary, like, for example, when we reach the phase of heartbeat identification, I have to say, it always reminds me of this. You probably saw that video when a Scotsman is trying to write in an elevator and say 11th floor, you know, and so the audio recognition cannot recognize his accent for 10 minutes or so, so he goes to the 10th floor. So digital identity verification has a lot of undisputable advantages, but also it is a process that carries, and we were talking about this, a lot of challenges for our societies. And one of the interesting questions when we talk about, innovative technologies is, for example, for Marc, and we talk about governments and central banks and regulators in general. So, Marc, what role do governments and in particular policy development play in helping identity to develop? I'm sure there is a lot to talk about on this because it's always a constant challenge.
Thank you for the question, Goran. What role do they play? What role should they play? Andrius, excuse me, but my goodness me, they're terrible. No, I'm joking. Something that Andrius was talking about earlier really struck a chord, and I made a little note to myself. He used the phrase watchdog, and you just repeated it. I think watchdog is a very historical and old way that some less informed and forward-thinking regulators look at their roles. And it implies a very traditional approach, which is we set some rules, and then we set some checks in place, and we gather some data, and if we see some activity that has happened historically that don't fall within the rules or contravene the rules, then we'll try and find a legal person, we'll try and find a legal entity that we can chase. It's very retrospective looking. And in this enforced digitization that we've all been through, where we are now, I think globally, a lot more open to using digital tools, to different ways of living, being, and working, the role of regulators has to change as well. They need to be more forward-looking. There need to be more sandboxes. There need to be more people like Andrius, who by training is a computer scientist, who off his own back has understood that this area called blockchain is something that he should go and research, and has been building and pushing from within his public sector function a drive to raise the level of understanding so that they can think about things in a different way. And as we look globally, which we do at INATBA, we see the roles of regulators operating very differently, almost from a theological perspective or cultural perspective. If we look to the East, there is an increasing tendency for governments in certain parts of Asia to be slightly more autocratic about their approach to technology and the use of technology. And what I mean by that is we're starting to see signs from certain countries in Asia that whilst they acknowledge technology presents opportunity, they would prefer that opportunity is exploited by the central government rather than opened up to the private sector. Therefore, their approach from a regulatory perspective has been to draw walls around innovation and to suggest that the innovation is only going to take place within the public sector, within government-controlled entities. And that's one approach which will allow technologies such as blockchain to be rolled out at massive scale and alternative finance models to be deployed to very large audiences. And the government will enjoy reduced fees, will enjoy an increased velocity of money, will enjoy the push of digital services out to its citizens. But its citizens might not enjoy the respect of their privacy. They might have their metadata used for purposes that they don't agree with. And that is one approach. I'm certainly not saying it's wrong. But then we see other approaches, for example, as we look to the United States of America, which is driven from a different perspective with, for example, the infrastructure bill that is currently passing through the US. And that approach to blockchain and similar technologies that are allowing new and innovative forms of finance to be considered and imagined could be launched at scale is coming from a tax collection perspective, largely. And a recognition that as these markets begin to grow to scale, for example, decentralized finance, which is an application built on top of blockchain, is currently holding in locked funds tens of billions of US dollars. And the number of transactions happening on a monthly basis is up into the trillions. Now that's an interesting market. particularly if some of that activity is happening within your geographical borders, and that means you could collect taxes. So that's another approach. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just an approach. The approach that we see being developed in Europe, which is where we all sit, is a slightly more collaborative approach, and I think that's because we try and bring a number of countries together around common messages and common policies, and we're accustomed to that because of the European Parliament. But that takes a lot more time. And so if you need to bring 27 governments together to educate, to learn, to build a sandbox, to agree what the rules are, and then to roll the rules out, as we see in Europe, that can take 2, 3, 4 years' time. Well, some alternative finance applications are spinning up, maturing, and oftentimes collapsing in just a few weeks. So how can a regulator keep up when that pace of change, when that pace of innovation is happening without permission already on their shores? I'm not sure that we have a great answer to it yet. But one thing is certain, just to wrap up on the question, I think the role of regulators, policymakers, legislators, and government strategists needs to be less of watchdog, to go back to Andrius's model, and far more of almost an innovator, an accelerator, and a collaborator, to see where they can exploit technology to achieve some of their objectives in collaboration with the private sector.
I was talking to myself, sorry. I'm surprised to see how quickly our session is actually coming to its end. And at the end of the session, I would just, of course, we will have official conclusions later on and recommendations coming from the sessions. But I would just like to mention that identically as we opened the session, so technology is irreversibly coming. As they said in Star Trek, every resistance is futile. So we can, as easily stop acting like it's, not coming, a lot of us today. But it is coming with a number of challenges that need to be addressed, not only regulatory challenges, because the biggest challenge for the implementation of data access identity is human behavior, because all of these changes, all pieces of legislation and all processes, all advancement finally gets to the point of the person. And we need to make sure we change ourselves along with the changes we make to the technology. That is not easy. It is much easier to change a machine than change a person, but we all need to give an extra hand to help the regulators and the entrepreneurs move forward in this process. With that note, I would like to try to keep within the time limits that we have, and thank you all for today's participating in today's session. We will remain open for any questions or discussions you may need to engage with us, and we'll be here all day long. Thank you again, and have a great remaining part of the conference. Thank you.